As we know, justice is defined differently by different people, and morality, being very subjective, is difficult to universalize. Right and wrong, good and bad, are dependent on individual cultures and collective cultures which have developed over several decades, some even over centuries. Yet, there are certain universal principles that cut across all barriers, that stress on maintaining dignity, equality, and independence, and that most of the major religions which have withstood the passage of time have something to say about. However, if we look around today, these moral lines seem to be getting increasingly blurred. What is perceived as an act of oppression and terror by several is perceived as a struggle for survival and upholding of traditions by several others. So, understanding the how these diametrically opposite social views came into being, what led to their thought patterns, understanding how where these lines are to be drawn, understanding how these attitudes may develop in the future is all a very, very difficult task, but one that requires immediate attention. Now, is it possible to think of a common code of ethical conduct beyond the traditional barriers that we have created for ourselves? Some sort of a frame of mind which we can refer to when faced with an ethical dilemma. Decades ago, legendary poet Rabindranath Tagore described one such an ideal frame of mind in his Nobel Prize winning anthology, Geetanjali. A frame of mind that is so pure and undiluted, a frame of mind that everyone aspires to experience. So Tagore recites, where the mind is without fear and the head is held high, where knowledge is free, where the world has not been broken up into fragments by narrow domestic walls, where words come out from the depth of truth, where tireless striving stretches its arms towards perfection, where the clear stream of reason has not lost its way into the dreary desert sand of dead habit, where the mind is led forward by thee into ever widening thought and action. Into that heaven of freedom, my Father, let my country awake. Let's take a look at the relevance of Tagore's poem in today's scenario. Where the mind is without fear and the head is held high. A frame of mind where every individual can hold his head high up with a sense of self belief, a sense of self dignity, and that inner courage to be able to face anything in life. Where knowledge is free, where one is able to share what one knows transparently within relationships, between religions, between countries, a frame of mind where one is able to share willingly for the betterment of the world as a whole, without giving room to the emergence of a thousand different conspiracy theories. Where the world has not been broken up into fragments by narrow domestic walls, Tagore says, where we stop making a fuss about your space, your principles, your religion, my religion, and look at a much larger perspective and focus on larger issues such as saving the planet from climate catastrophe. A state of mind where you feel so one with everything around to the point of knowing very well that if you're going to harm someone, you're actually harming yourself in some way because we're all interconnected. Where words come out from the depth of truth, where we develop the maturity and the responsibility to walk our talk, to mean what we say and to say what we mean, where we actually adhere to those innumerous peace treaties that we sign on, where tireless striving stretches its arms towards perfection, where one strives constantly to do his best without holding on to those desperately to those recognitions for his effort, without constantly looking at that social media page to check on how many likes or how many hearts or claps that you have received. A state of mind where you do not compare yourself with people around you, but you keep asking yourself this question: have I given my best, or is there anything more that I can do at this point of time? Where the clear stream of reason has not lost its way into the dreary desert sands of dead habit, Tagore says. Where we develop the inner courage to come out of our comfort zones, to break those existing patterns and customs that are irrelevant today. Some of these customs may have been very essential for existence eons ago, but they are not only irrelevant, they are inappropriate and to a certain extent retrogressive today. And yet we hold on to them so tightly without letting them go. As a matter of false pride, without allowing any kind of reason to enter into our minds and evolve with time. And thereby we are going completely against nature, we are going completely against evolution. And evolution is the law of nature. As Charles Darwin so beautifully put it, it's not the strongest of the species that survives, nor the most intelligent, but the ones that are most responsive to change. And so change we must, and get away from those dreary desert sands of dead habits, where the mind is led forward by thee into ever widening thought and action, where the mind is led forward by universal principles and existential laws which are much beyond the barriers that we have created for ourselves, where the mind operates from a sense of maximum good for maximum people. Now, this poem was originally written in Bengali by Tagore and was meant as a prayer seeking for freedom of the country. And so the concluding line says, "Into that heaven of freedom, my father, let my country awake." Decades later, I would like to tweak it a little and say, "Into that heaven of freedom, my father, let humanity awake." As we observe around us, there seems to be a resurgence of major traditions and the new sprout of innovative religions that are all contributing to the notion of we would like to make a difference to the world, or we want to make a difference to the world. No questions asked about the intentions here, which are all very noble, but there are a lot of apprehensions about the processes that are being followed to achieve these goals, which many are not even aware of. Many people believe that dedication and devotion to their own traditions requires hostility and rejection of other faiths and their practitioners as well, which is totally not necessary. One need not become a Christian in order to love Christ. One need not become a Hindu in order to believe in karma. You could follow your own paths and still respect the other paths and love their practitioners as well. There is this groundbreaking survey, nationwide survey conducted in India by the Pew Research Center, funded by the John Templeton Foundation, which explores how Indians think and feel about their own faiths and about the faiths of their fellow citizens. Now, more than 3 years in the making, the key findings are based on 30,000 face to face interviews of individuals who conducted in about 17 languages across the country in the late 2019 and early 2020. Let me quickly read a few highlights about the key findings of this report to you. According to the survey, more than 80% of India's general population and more than 3/4 of respondents in each of the 6 religious groups the survey covered said that respecting all religions is very important to being truly Indian. You get the sense that Indians prefer a concept of pluralism more like a patchwork quilt with clear lines of segregation between religious communities. And yet, one of the most fascinating findings of the study was the extent to which members of different groups had beliefs more similar to Indians of other faiths than to members of their own faiths in other parts of the world. For example, Muslims in India were just as likely as Hindus to say they believe in karma, 77% each, despite the concept's roots in Hinduism's foundational texts. In northern India, 12% of Hindus and 10% of Sikhs, along with 37% of Muslims, identify with Sufism, a mystical tradition closely associated with Islam. If you just take a look at the data, it's surprising, says Neha Sehgal, the Associate Director of Research for the Pew Research Center. Despite the fact that people live highly religiously segregated lives, perhaps as a consequence of living side by side for so long, belief systems have just found a way to permeate those patchwork lines, she says. Now, this whole process of searching for shared values across traditional boundaries, across religious faiths, depends to a great extent on how truthful we are in accepting the prevalent diversity, in how we are able to accept the clearly demarcated lines. Are we going to look at this as an obstacle to be overcome or as a potential for growth? Now, the Pew Research Survey categorically shows the presence of these shared values across religious boundaries, and it kind of reiterates the shaping of what Carl Jung refers to as the collective unconscious, a phenomenon which occurs by a connective principle that he refers to as synchronicity. According to Carl Jung, collective unconscious is the collection of thoughts and images of one's ancestral experience at birth, which he shares with humanity at large. Now, this phenomenon of sharing occurs by a scientific principle called spontaneous synchronization, which is a remarkable naturally occurring effect in nature, whereby a group of oscillating units, in this case humans, who occur in their naturally different frequencies, but when they are interacting with each other, they exhibit collective oscillations of a common frequency. Now, this perhaps explains the forming of the collective unconscious. The next question that pops up is, what about the ancestry of India could have led to this patchwork quilt with clearly segregated lines scenario as described by the Pew Research Survey? I wonder if we could call this detached attachment. Let's take a look at how this phenomenon could have evolved into the current scenario. Ancient Hindu texts say that the visible world exists in the invisible reality from which it is derived. Now, this invisible reality is called Brahman in Sanskrit, meaning infinite. So, the Hindu texts speak about the universe as a multiplication of one, the Brahman, which manifests into many. In short, the world of diversity owes its origins to a single source, a single reality. So, the ethical implications of this is that the universe, with all its living beings, actually form a single community, what in Sanskrit we call Vasudhaiva Kudumbakam, meaning the world is one family. Now, this means that we are relational beings and our well being depends on each other. Why? Because right and wrong and truth and falsity of an individual's behavior cannot be entirely absolute. It depends on how our culture and orientation view the subject of goodness. And that brings us back to the community being the matrix of development. Now, Hinduism is a way of life that is based on Sanatana Dharma, which can be broadly translated as eternal best practices. There are two foundational principles that help one adhere to the ethical way of life: the concept of karma and the concept of ahimsa. Karma is nothing but the law of cause and effect, which can be described as every thought and intention has consequences. Now, we're not talking only about physical actions here, we're also talking about ethical and moral actions and intentions. So it kind of makes you responsible because you know that every thought and action of yours is consequential. And once again, we are not talking only about the short term consequences here, we are also talking about the long term outcomes which are generated much after you stop walking the planet. So it's kind of an eternal quest to understand and live the life of moral character, acquiring virtues through practice along the way. There are no magic formulas. Every situation is different. By honing virtuous practices and by aligning yourself to existential laws, people are able to make their best choices when faced with an ethical challenge. As Swami Vivekananda so beautifully puts it, neither money pays, not name, nor fame, nor learning. It is character that cleaves through adamantine valves of difficulties. Now, the next principle is the concept of ahimsa, which can be broadly translated as non-violence. But it's not just pertaining to absence of physical violence, it's much more than that. It also means not interfering with the peace of the other, not intruding into the space of the other, which actually means harmonious coexistence. Now, that explains the detached attachment attitudes and the patchwork quilt with clearly segregated lines scenario as described by the Pew Research Center. Now, let's quickly recap what we have discussed so far. We aspired for an ideal frame of mind as seen by Tagore. We saw the possibilities of harmonious coexistence as shown by the Pew Research Survey. We spoke about the two concepts of ahimsa and karma, which aid in harmonious coexistence. Now, the forming of this larger good, which aids in harmonious coexistence, can be mediated through two principles: solidarity and subsidiarity. Solidarity is the feeling of oneness with everything around, not just the person who's just sitting next to you, but the one who's even farthest from you spatially. Now, this kind of makes you responsible, keeping in mind that not only the present but also the future. Subsidiarity is that recognition that we are an agent. It's that awareness that we are just a small part of the whole. And so we should operate keeping in mind the whole. Let me sign off by wishing once again, into that heaven of freedom, my Father, let humanity awake. Thank you.